What if learning psychology meant stepping directly into people's lives, rather than just reading about them in books? Today, let's explore why clinical immersion might be the most transformational experience a psychologist in training could have. Hello there, this is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by PsychI, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychological science to a diverse range of current events and to better your life. Listen for free wherever you go for podcasts, or see the link in the show note for a written transcript of this episode. This episode was made possible through a PsychI sponsorship with the Alliant International University, California School of Professional Psychology. If you'd like to learn about graduate programs at CSPP, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for this episode. Did you think psychology grad school is all textbooks and theories? Not in Dr. Michi Fu's world, where immersive clinical experiences challenge students to confront culture, identity, and humanity. In this episode, Dr. Fu will tell us all about clinical immersion, a powerful teaching approach that pushes psychology students beyond theory and into the heartbeat of community care. Dr. Fu is a professor of clinical psychology at CSPP. With a multicultural lens and a passion for immersive work, Dr. Fu bridges academic insight with real-world healing, whether in the classroom, through private practice, or with underserved populations in partnership with the Garfield Health Center. Bringing a global perspective, Dr. Fu's also a visiting professor at National Taiwan University and a former Okura Mental Health Leadership Fellow dedicated to social justice advocacy. Longtime listeners may remember Dr. Fu from a powerful earlier episode on Asian American and Pacific Islander inequities in mental health. If you missed it, or you want to revisit that conversation, you'll find a link in the show notes to catch up. Dr. Fu, welcome back to the show.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm actually really excited to share about a topic that's near and dear to my heart.
Well, let's dive into immersion. Is that too cheesy? Am I allowed to say dive into immersion?
That's kind of the approach I take, so it's very appropriate.
So, clinical immersion is often described as a transformative experience for psychology students, but I wonder, what does it actually look like? Could you walk us through a typical clinical immersion program and how that's different from traditional psych training?
Absolutely. So traditional psych training that I've had was very didactic. There's a lot of theory. There are, of course, practica type of courses at the graduate level, especially. I think traditional learning emphasizes things like critical thinking, demonstrating some knowledge attainment, and that typically can be sufficient for different types of disciplines. However, I think immersive learning is very powerful. It requires active participation that includes things like self-reflection, direct observation, and being able to directly apply a theory. It's different across various levels. So, for example, what I might do for an undergraduate course is drastically different than what I would do for a year-long graduate course that folks are expected to immerse in various activities. So not just across the educational levels, but also across the class itself. You could do something smallish like student presentations to demonstrate something, or actual field-based learning. So as an example, I teach at Cal Poly Pomona, and you met a bunch of those students at WPA, and they have a philosophy that's called Become by Doing. And so we have a hospitality program on our campus that kind of mimics the Culinary Institute of America, where the students are running the show. They're cooking, they're hostesses, and they're also the wait staff, and they will learn real quickly whether or not this is something they want to do when they get older. We also have something like the Lyle Center for Regenerative Studies, where students are learning how to grow things sustainably. At CSPP, we have different kinds of opportunities. There's a year-long class that I loved to teach called Intercultural Processes and Human Diversity, and it requires people to engage in various exercises. But in addition to that, I run a lot of electives for our social justice emphasis. It's called Multicultural Community Clinical Psychology, MCCP. And in those electives, I get to do a lot of field-based coursework. I also do this, as you mentioned, I do international work at the National Taiwan University, where I've developed a course that was tailored for their master's in global health program. And a spinoff from all of this is that I also do this as continuing education, both through CSPP as well as in the past through California Psych Association. So I think across various levels, immersive learning looks different, and it can feel drastically different than the traditional model of psychology training, but it's really intended to complement and enhance.
What do you think are the advantages of students diving into clinical immersion sooner rather than later?
There are a lot of advantages, but I do want to first note that there are some sorts of coursework that are very critical and helpful towards making someone prepared for their clinical work. So as an example, would be good to know ethics before you actually do psychotherapy. Not impossible to have contact with clients, but generally speaking, you want to know certain things are okay or not okay. And so there are coursework that really make things a lot easier, but there are so many advantages to clinical immersion. So one is that you develop an awareness a lot sooner than you might if you're waiting to know, I don't really want to work with children. They scare me. Or I hear that all the time. My students will say things like, I've learned I can't work with the elderly for whatever reason. So being able to just learn the populations that you're drawn to or may not feel super comfortable with earlier on is great if you're trying to carve out a specialty for yourself. It also helps you to understand what kind of settings and roles might be more appropriate for your personality. So as an example, if I have contact early on, I can suss out, I prefer therapy or I prefer doing assessments. So I think there's a lot of advantages.
Could you walk us through like the first immersive activity that a student might face and what that would feel like? And you mentioned it being different for undergrad and grad school. So could I be greedy and ask for an example from both?
I'm gonna give you examples across the levels because, oh my gosh, it's like choosing your left arm or your right arm. I love all of it. So for Cal Poly, the last class I taught there was multicultural psych, and that's the one I'll be teaching again this upcoming fall. So I'll just use some of the exercises from there. As one of the intro activities to discuss ethnocentrism, such a heady kind of topic that it's easy for people to say, I think I understand. Yeah, it's people who think a lot about whatever they have been socialized with, and that kind of drives their worldview. So you can have that knowledge, but then asking students, hey, everyone, take out a piece of paper, draw a picture of the world as you understand it, and then we're going to think, pair, share. So now you're going to share with your neighbor and compare and contrast how similar or your worlds might look really different. And we usually see, oh, this person drew a globe, or actually many people might draw maps. And we find that when they do, they're usually centering the country that they are most familiar with. So we might see a lot of USA maps. But in that exercise, I had a student really upset because she said her classmate neglected one of the biggest continents in the world where her ancestors came from. And so they had to have a dialogue about what that was like to really experience ethnocentrism. Other things that I do are everyone think, pair, share. How do you get home from our evening class? I tend to teach the night classes at Cal Poly. So at 9:45, what's your ritual? And by gender, they quickly discover guys say, I just step in my car and I go. While women might say, well, I have to get my keys and pretend they're weapons. I have to pretend I'm talking to someone on a cell phone. And so there are these elaborate kind of rituals that some genders just don't think about. And so it's a very powerful kind of exercise for some of the people to say, I never knew that my classmates had to go through this. So if anyone ever wants an escort to their car, I'm happy to do that. So it's a really quick way for people to learn about safety in the world related to gender. At Alliant, I do things like, there was a privilege exercise that my mentor created. Kamea Shorter-Glidden created this amazing exercise where we give you poster board paper and we split you all up into small groups. All the first years have to take it. And so every single section of this class are scrambled, and then we give them supplies and instructions. Please create a poster about the diversity in whatever, Southern California. And so the students are broken up into their groups, and then they're asked to bring their products for the faculty to judge. And then the faculty give actual consequences. People who win get a little ticket and they get to go to the prize table, which is full of all these brunch goodies. We've had coffee cake and orange juice and continental spread. And the people who did not win, well, you can go to our concession table. There are saltines there and there's a jug of water. We hope you brought your own cup today to share that one jug of water. And the results from that are really upsetting. People are like, this is not fair. This was rigged. Why was it rigged? We stratified the type of resources all the groups got. So one group might get a newspaper and butcher paper, or newspaper, that's it, and some tape. And then another group, Group B, would have magazines, glue sticks, and maybe butcher paper. Then the top tier group would get magazines, crayons, markers, feathers and glitter, and poster board. And then when the judges, meaning all the faculty from the different sections, go and rate everyone in front of all their peers, we tell them transparently what the criteria are, including how well did you reflect the theme? How neat was your product? And so the groups with scissors obviously are probably going to have a better shot at that. How much use of color did you use in your product? So those folks with black and white newspaper sections are going to be very upset that they feel the odds were stacked against them. So that's a very efficient way for us to talk about the inequities in society and how that privilege can translate to things like college admission. So when people say you should just try harder, we help our students to understand that there might be some systemic inequities that make things difficult. We have them also do things like pair them with a peer, and your assignment is to spend 4 hours immersed in their culture. So you can go to a cousin's wedding, you can go to Shabbat, you can take them to Chinatown, to an acupuncturist, whatever it is that you consider to be part of your culture. And then you're supposed to really reflect upon how would this be for you to treat someone from this culture. It's far more efficient than having them read a book, see a few movies, when they are there in that setting saying, oh, this is really different than what I grew up with. It's quite powerful. So that's the intercultural class for the first years. The other courses that I get to do at CSPP are the electives for our social justice emphasis. In MCCP, I get to do things like spirituality and multicultural mental health. When we do that, we actually have had a potluck after attending a Shabbat. I think it was one of our very first visits. One of my faculty had invited us to his temple. And then we got to have a potluck with the parishioners, and we were able to engage in a very lively Q&A. So that was the model for that semester, going to all these different religious affiliations. So that class only flew on Saturday and Sundays. And we would go not just to temples and things like that, but sweat lodges. And having someone help us to journey from the old ways was really enlightening for my students rather than just reading out of a book. And I'm very grateful that CSPP also enabled me to create clinical immersion courses abroad. So Alliant International University was open to have me create relationships with some entities in China. And that class has then been replicated in Taiwan. And I'm currently developing their series in Korea. So there we actually go to hospitals, counseling centers, acupuncturists, herbalists. However, wellness is pursued among people who have mental health issues in other countries is something that we want to observe. My students have sat with other students from these universities and shared their curriculum side by side. Asked them, what are you learning and how is it impacting your society and vice versa. So it's a very powerful exchange to do that type of a course. It was so powerful that National Taiwan University asked me to replicate this for their global health program. So I got to design a mental health and suicide elective course where we go touring. We go to community clubhouses that are run by community members. We've been to our teaching hospital, college counseling center. And in my own wellness tour that I do for CEs, so these are just for colleagues, I always tell people, if you come with me on this immersive tour, you're actually signing up for 3 tours for the price of 1. So one is like the mental health and social services aspect of it. The other is cultural immersion. So my first class that I took was to China, and it was really powerful to be in the Forbidden City and see this is the genesis of meritocracy. This is why Asians are so steadfast about education. East Asians are really valuing this because in the olden days, it was the only way to promote your family, was to study hard and work for the imperial court. And so I think when my students were sitting there in the middle of the court, they really understood some of their Asian patients and their families who say education at all costs. We also do things like the third tour is like a foodie tour. No 2 meals should ever be the same because there's such variety abroad. So I want people to understand things from night market food. You can have something nutritious and tasty to the Michelin rated places. When people come away from this wellness tour, they won't have just visited a domestic violence shelter and a children's orphanage, senior living, but they also have done things like attended a vegan cooking class in a rural area to see how people farm and are able to do the farm to table stuff. I'm going to say that one of the highlights of that tour is that people end up really being moved by things like we were serenaded on Christmas by senior living residents. They sang to us in Japanese because Taiwan was occupied at one point in time. And so the education system taught people who are now, we call them silver legends. They taught them Japanese. So when they're dealing with dementia and things like that, they're easily recalling things from their childhood. So my students were so moved sitting with the residents who were singing to us. Some of them were holding hands with them. And it was just such a moving experience that some of them came back saying, I am no longer afraid to work with the elderly. Or vice versa, when we went to the orphanage, I am no longer afraid of working with children who have not just like a disability, but like a double kind of levels of oppression. So it's been a very fascinating process to see how quickly people can learn and shift their approach when they go on these clinical immersion, either class activities or just field-based learning.
This episode was made possible through a Psychi sponsorship with the Alliant International University, California School of Professional Psychology. That's CSPP. Founded in 1969, CSPP was one of the nation's first independent schools of professional psychology. Today, CSPP continues its commitment to preparing the next generation of mental health professionals and advocates. Their dedication to ensuring every community's access to quality mental health care extends from integrated care to inclusive family therapy. Explore their programs at https://info.alliant.edu/partner-psychi. And of course, I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. As you've pointed out, immersion can certainly be an emotional experience. Do you have any tips, or how do you help students to navigate these experiences while maintaining, their own psychological well-being?
This is such a good question that was asked during one of my tours. My students and I had gone to the mountains of central Taiwan in a little itty bitty town called Puli. It's considered rather holy because there is a high concentration of temples there. And when folks in Taiwan are not feeling well, they tend not to think directly of, I should go speak with a therapist. They think, I should go and pray or something like that. So we wanted our students to get a sense of what locals might do as a first stop. We did a Q&A with a monk at the temple, and the students got to ask a bunch of questions. What do you all do if someone shows up hearing voices? What do you all do if? And so after all of that, the last question was, do you just have any advice for us? What should we do? Because we're all trying to be healers. And the monk very simply said, you have to take care of yourselves. Self-care is the most important thing that we can do because we are so busy helping others. My students walked away feeling so understood. Some of them actually cried at the response because they had felt like they need to hold everything together for others, and being given permission to really pay attention to their own psychological well-being was such a gift. So it's something that I share with my students now. You're going to go see a lot. You have to make sense out of it. So I embed things like reaction papers. I've also done non-traditional things like renting out a karaoke room because it's big enough to serve as a classroom where we can debrief. My students with the local students are sitting together having an exchange, talking about the highlights of their time together. I think those kind of almost like a debrief, the aftercare of all these experiences helps us to kind of digest what's happening. So the culture shock isn't as much as it could be if you didn't have someone to kind of guide you through this parallel experience.
Psychology is deeply influenced by cultural context. So how could clinical immersion help students develop broader perspectives and cultural competence in mental health care?
I love your question, and I'm glad to first make a slight tweak, if that's okay. The word cultural competence is something that's been widely promoted and researched, and my mentors have really paved the way with that term. I'm very grateful to them that I was able to enter the field with that already established as something that we should pay attention to. Since I entered the field, it's fluctuated a lot in terms of how to prioritize cultural competence. Cultural competence is a little bit of a misnomer because it denotes that we've achieved something. So I tell my students, like a health goal we might have. So let's say I want to reduce my BMI. So I work with a personal trainer and I finally reached that goal. Does that mean I never have to go back to the gym ever again? No. Like very similarly, culture is kind of a lifelong process. So I encourage my students to think about, instead of just competence, think about, we've had other iterations. We've gone through things like cultural awareness became a term that people were researching for a while, cultural sensitivity. And nowadays, and we also went through cultural responsiveness was another one. Nowadays, the terminology is about cultural humility. having a curious mind, respectful way of engaging with others. I don't know what the term will be in the future, but I think we're all trying to strive for the same kind of let's be respectful and not scare people away from Western ways of practicing psychology. When I did Q&A with various sites on my immersion tours, that is something that we talk about. How do you adapt what you're doing here in this context with this group? So that's something that we constantly ask all the various field-based visits and our hosts. We've gone to places like Dr. Joe is a really famous psychiatrist in Taipei, and he's known for being very culturally aware because he studied abroad. He does bilingual treatment. And I think my students learn a lot by touring his facility and seeing all the ways that he uses even the wall space, the way that he intentionally designs the waiting room is very healing. So even things like going to the faith leaders and asking the monks how they do what they do and whether or not they partner with psychology, I think it helps us to be responsive of like, oh, in this culture, they're the first stop and we're not the first responders. And then even things like when our host students, my colleagues will bring their students and I bring my students. They have these exchanges. So one of my favorite activities is I give them each some money to go eat a dinner one of the nights. So I'll say, everyone just come back here in whatever, 2 hours and we'll debrief whatever you all did or spoke about during that time. My colleague and I went to one of the restaurants and we happened to see our students across the way. It was a hot pot restaurant. Everyone was kind of like in a bar-like setting with their own hot pot in front of them. And so I accidentally could overhear the students across the way. Most of the time, I'm thinking students are asking questions like, how do you like your professors? What was your high school like? But instead, I heard them asking really profound questions of one another. What do you think is the meaning of life? I don't know what could be a more profound way of entering someone's culture than to understand their perspective about the meaning of life. And we do other things. Like I remember one year we counted down at Asia's largest fireworks show for New Year's Eve. It was at the Taipei 101. I had a bunch of students with me and we went after dinner. It was a voluntary exercise. Everyone can retire after the formal days, but most people opt in because they are so afraid of missing out. During this New Year's Eve celebration, my students were a little freaked out. It was extremely populated. We don't have a lot of events like that here in the States where people can gather safely. And when the fireworks display was over, students were quite surprised. Everyone was filing back into the subway, nice and neat. Everyone was so polite. There was no trash left over. And they got a real glimpse as to what a collectivistic style community is like.
So, how could clinical immersion prepare students, not just as clinicians, but more broadly also as advocates for systemic change in mental health care?
Thank you so much for asking this question. I'm really excited to answer it because I just finished teaching for the 4th time. Our elective, it's split up into 3 different types of components: public outreach, media, and advocacy. So this course, one of the first assignments we have is write an op-ed or do a white paper and send it off to someone. It is amazing to me the topics that the students think about: impact of divorce on children, impact of war, substance use recovery. Then the second assignment is do a social media campaign. I don't care if it's on Instagram or TikTok, but give psychology away. So there's an aspect of public outreach, but there's also an aspect of advocacy woven into those assignments. Then their group project is anything they want about giving psychology away or advocacy. So some of them have done podcast assignments. Some of them have reached out to different organizations to partner with them. And another thing that our classes used to do was to lobby in Sacramento. Used to be a lot easier to do that, to travel with students up north. It took a lot of coordination, and California Psych Association recently had some turnover. So I can't wait to bring students back there again. But short of that, we also have visited our local elected officials. We just hung out with Congresswoman Judy Chu I think we saw her in April. And so we were able to sit with her and offer her encouragement for the good work that she's doing, thank her. And then I wanted my students to see how advocacy works and how the legislative process works. So I taught them what I learned from APA, which is there's technically three stools or three legs of a stool to advocacy. So one is you can give your money away. Two is you can give your time away, like phone banking. Whatever the case, I told my students, you can also see yourself. There's a fourth leg to the stool, and that is you could run for office. We only have one psychologist that's seated in a federal position today. So I told them she has the same degree as you. One of you all should consider this in the future. We need friends that can vote for our dollars. So that's just an example of how clinical immersion can help prepare students for advocacy. I have other examples, but that class is all about that question.
Can I ask a silly question? Is there any difference between immersive learning and experiential learning? Is that just different terms for the same thing, or is there like kind of a uniqueness there?
It's not a silly question. I'm going to say experiential is the umbrella term, and immersive is one
Okay.
branch of it. Experiential can be like as simple as, okay, everyone, now we're going to practice deep breathing in this class. So now you all know what deep breathing is like because we've all experienced it together. And immersive would be, let's get out of the classroom and go hug a tree because that's what my eco-psychology class will probably do.
Are there any innovations or changes you'd like to see in how immersion is approached?
Changes would be to return to the olden days. In the olden days, there were apprentices and people could actually learn by doing. We do some of that in our later years of our graduate programs, but I think the way that education has been shaped more in recent history, there's some detachment with the actual applied work in various disciplines. So some people graduate without ever having tried anything in their profession unless they went and sought it themselves. So I'd love to see a return to how things might have worked in the past. In order to do that, there's a lot of approaches that need to be considered. So as an example, a lot of preparation needs to happen. The same approach that we use for doing research responsibly with marginalized populations is CBPAR, Community-Based Participatory Action Research. That's the kind of philosophy I use when I'm trying to do clinical immersion kind of coursework. As an example, for the spirituality course, I had to find someone who could explain to psychology students about things that others might consider very mystical and shamanistic. And I had to develop a relationship with the person that ended up guiding us through the sweat lodge. I have to do that times 10 for my international trips. Develop relationships at every single university that I'm going to stop through for the afternoon to have my students listen to a lecture or do some sort of professional exchange. So it takes a lot of time to build that rapport. And then I think other things that need to happen are responsible kind of educational activities and tours. So as an example, I learned really quickly that on international trips, some people have never traveled internationally. So they actually don't know not just how to behave at airports, but how to behave in other countries. So there's a lot of responsibility that I take on when I bring students abroad. And even with my colleagues, I will do like a brief screening, not excluding people if they've never traveled, but I want to make sure that they have the cultural humility to be curious and respectful. Otherwise, it becomes very irresponsible for me to bring people that are going to go and I mean, I've never had a student trash a hotel room, but I know that those type of things happen for some of my colleagues who've traveled with students. So in addition to that, I think having an awareness that if you are going to engage in these immersive activities, you're a bit of a tour guide as well as a participant. So you're not just serving as an educator, you're also teaching about the do's and don'ts. For example, when we went to an herbalist clinic, the students were asked, does anyone want to be the guinea pig? So students were willing to go and show the herbalist their tongue, talk about their elimination cycles and things like that in front of other students. So it gets kind of personal. There's no HIPAA. We're all sitting there watching all this happening. And then to everyone's surprise, they were extremely accurate with their diagnosis. You must have problems falling asleep. You must have problems with dry mouth and blah, 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 blah. And so the students immediately feel like they are curious about whether or not these type of interventions are available where they live back at home. I had to be the one that drew the shortest straw when we went to a bone setter. No one wanted to get on the table. So when the bone setter said, well, I want to demonstrate what I know on somebody. So I was like, I'll demonstrate. I'll be your guinea pig. And that guy twisted and turned my body in ways where I thought, oh, this is how I die in front of my students. Like he had my neck in his hands and I was like, clearly he can kill me with just like a snap. And when he was done, my students were shocked that I got up from the table. I looked so relieved and peaceful. So he asked, does anyone else want to go? 10 of them raised their hands. All of them wanted to give it a shot because they thought this guy obviously did something really miraculous. So I think having the mindset that we are active participants and not just educators that are somewhat removed from this lesson planning is necessary for this type of approach to be successful. And then I had mentioned briefly earlier, the idea of aftercare can't be emphasized enough. I used to come back going, woo, that was a lot. And then I'd get tons of reflection papers that only I could see. And I felt very special, like I could cherish their thoughts. But then I thought, some of my students need to learn that they're not the only ones that had this profound life-changing experience. They need to exchange words with one another to know, like, this is what happens when you immerse yourself into another world. So being able to debrief beyond the assignments has been something that I find is helpful to kind of put the cherry on top for the participants. But beyond that, when they end up doing this follow-up and thank yous with one another, they forge these lifelong relationships. So I had my colleague from Taiwan, her student came and did an exchange here in the States. And the students that were with him in Taiwan ended up being his tour guide. They took him to a Dodgers game. They took him like down to San Diego from LA. And so I think the immersive way of learning is a lifelong approach where it wasn't just a class. I got an A and now I'm checked out. The students have continued to reflect. Years later at an APA conference, I saw one of my earliest cohorts and she said that the class changed her life, that that's the way that she teaches now and that's the way she gives assignments to her patients. So if anything, I think there are a lot of innovations and changes that we can all try and incorporate to make immersive approaches more approachable for folks. And I think in being able to do that, it would be really beautiful if we could all emulate. I mean, it's Cal Poly Pomona's motto, but the become by doing, I think is very powerful. And truth be told, it works well with alternative learning styles. So I was that kid in elementary school that I could finish my work early. And because I was done, I would find 10 different excuses to get out of my seat. Oh, I need to get the restroom pass again, teacher. I need to sharpen my pencil again. Oops, I dropped my eraser on all the way on that side. It rolled over there. So like I needed to get out of my seat. And I think this style of learning honors people that can learn traditionally, but it also creates spaces that are more inclusive for people that learn in different ways. So I encourage all people to try to take a class like this or maybe even create a class if they are an educator.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Psych Everywhere. If you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you go for podcasts. Tell a friend or a colleague about the show. Word of mouth is a huge help, so share what you learned at the dinner table or in your classes. You can also follow us on X at Psychi Podcast and leave a review at Apple Podcasts. You'll absolutely make my day, and more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Okay, that's all for now. I'll connect with you again soon. Copyright 2025, Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved. Did you know that Psychi is also seeking to increase its support for future generations of mental health advocates? We're currently raising funds for the Christian Ladd Hall Scholarship for Mental Health Advocacy. Christian Ladd Hall was a young man whose life was impacted by bipolar disorder 2. To honor Christian, this scholarship will annually support one undergraduate or graduate student seeking a career in mental health advocacy. Once fully endowed, a yearly recipient will receive $3,000 and can request an additional $1,000 to create and offer a mental health event in their community. To learn more or donate to this scholarship, please visit the link in the show notes.